So welcome everyone to this event today on iterative A/B testing and really launching this toolkit for A/B testing that I'm extremely excited about. So I'm Jonathan Stern, Deputy Director of the Global Education Team at Gates Foundation, and I'll be chairing this session. So I don't know if there's anyone that wants to come in with any logistical things ahead of time. If so, feel free to interrupt me. If not, I will just continue with moving us forward. Um, so as a quick overview for the flow of today's session, it'll begin with a brief framing from myself. That part's already happening, so congratulations, you're already on board with what we're doing. We'll then hand over to two presenters. The first will be Amanda Beatty, who's now the head of research and learning at Protham International, formerly principal researcher at Youth Impact, who will be presenting on the A/B testing toolkit and giving some examples. We'll then hand over to Andres Parrado, associate director of IPA Right-Fit Evidence Unit, who will go into even further A/B testing examples in his presentation. We'll have reflections from two discussants after that. Temrina Madon, the co-founder of the Agency Fund, will kick us off. And Mpumi Mohowane, who's a director of reading at South African Department of Basic Education. And then we'll have closing remarks from Noam Angrist, co-founder of Youth Impact, and executive director of WhatWorks Hub for Global Education. And we'll finish up the session with about 15 minutes of moderated Q&A. So maybe just as a brief framing for us to get us started. For those of you who don't know me, the first thing that you should know about me is that I love data. I won't purchase anything without doing what I call a little bit of research, but what my wife often refers to as, oh my goodness, are you still looking at reviews? It's just a spatula, just buy one already. And so I'm excited about the space that we're in and what we're talking about today. Also, professionally, as a long-term implementer and research and evaluation lead of large-scale evaluation programs, I was often frustrated by how little we generally learned about our programming along the way. Baseline, midline, endline evaluations were typically prioritized, and there was no real roadmap for how to conduct rigorous short-term evaluations to inform programmatic decision making. So when Noam and I started talking about A/B testing a number of years ago, I got really excited. However, it still often seemed for a while like that thing that Noam does, or that Youth Impact does, or that the WhatWorks Hub does. And I imagine that many felt it was either too complicated or nebulous or whatever it may be to understand how to implement it within their own work. And so that's why I think it's so great to see this now culminating in the toolkit, and seeing something that actually provides explicit guidance to people who are interested in learning more about A/B testing and how to try it out for themselves. A few quick things that I really appreciate about the recommendations in the toolkit that I think are worth highlighting. The first is kind of this theme of more is not always better, right? So the idea of begin with small tweaks, right? To get started with A/B testing, familiarize yourself with the process and requirements. It's easy to want to do it all, but it's really important to think critically and be focused. Somewhat relatedly, focus on the single indicator to start, or a single outcome, right? Collecting too much data on too many indicators is a common mistake that we're all susceptible to. And so I think it's really important to think really critically about that. Third, which is an issue that I've run into many times in my career, is test things that you don't actually know the answers to, and which will help inform future design of the program, right? Don't focus on obvious low risk improvements, right? The purpose isn't to test something that you know will work. The purpose is to determine what variations might work and if the cost trade-off is justifiable, right? So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind when going through this presentations today, as well as when thinking about using this on your own. And also, I urge people to think carefully about the outcomes that they're seeking to impact, right? It's easy to imagine a world in which A/B testing primarily focuses on knowledge shifts or preferences, as it often had been the case historically in the tech sector. And I don't want people to fall into that trap, right? I think it's really important that even though shifting learning outcomes can take time and can be noisy, it's important not to undermine the results by focusing on the wrong outcomes. I think this is something that Youth Impact and the Hub and Gnome have done a really good job on historically, but something I want to make sure that people continue to focus on. So the last thing I will say before I hand over to the presenters is that ultimately A/B testing doesn't replace the need for long-term evaluations, right? But it's a much needed complement in order to rapidly understand what works, what doesn't, and how variations in implementation can lead to important shifts in cost effectiveness of programming. So as a lover of data, as a person responsible for ensuring that we do everything we can to maximize the impact of each dollar we spend, I think this toolkit marks a really important shift for the sector, and I'm extremely excited to see where it goes. And so, without any more from me, I'm happy to hand over to the people who will actually be presenting on the heart of the matter here. And so, I will first turn over to Amanda.
Great. Thank you so much, Jonathan. And I guess, first of all, I want to say, wowza, we are like overwhelmed with the news of how many people registered for this webinar. I think, a couple of years ago, even when we started talking and doing A/B testing at Youth Impact, we couldn't have imagined that the popularity could have grown so much. So just really excited to see all of you here and so many people interested in and participating. Okay, let's see. I think the slides are coming up. Here they go. Great. Yeah. So today, as Jonathan, thank you so much for that great intro. Today, I'm mainly going to focus on some highlights from our A/B testing toolkit, and those are this toolkit here. You can see the link right here. We'll also share that in the chat and probably kind of in some of the show notes. And Jonathan beautifully introed it, so thank you very much. I want to give a shout out to my co-authors, Claire and Gnome, who are here, and also who's also watching, our innovation and communications lead, Elle Brooks, who helped make this toolkit not only readable, but just so pleasing to look at. So thank you, Elle. All right, so first I'm going to talk a little bit about what iterative A/B testing is, what it is good for. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about Youth Impact's experience with A/B testing, how we've used it, what we've learned. And then I'm going to end with just walking you through some of the practical tools we developed for the toolkit to help other organizations get started with A/B testing. So at Youth Impact, we not only do A/B testing, but also help other partner organizations get up to speed and get started in their A/B testing practice. So what's the goal of A/B testing? Well, first of all, it's for implementation research, right? This is a tool for program improvement. Use case here is optimizing or trying to determine the best version of the program. And key aspects of improving programs here are cost effectiveness, so dollar per unit impact, how scalable a version of the program is, and in what particular context it might work. So in a certain geography, by a certain implementer. A/B testing really helps us answer these like concrete, very programmatic, implementer-oriented questions. And what makes A/B testing a good fit for an impatient program designer or an implementer? An easy way to remember this is that all the answers start with R. So like if those of you who are familiar with randomized trials, we're also using causal methods. So we have reliable evidence of impact. Unlike RCTs, A/B tests are rapid, they're fast. We get results in weeks or months rather than years, which is kind of a more typical horizon for a randomized trial. And the last bit is that Also unlike RCTs, A/B testing is routine or regular. So it's a continuous process. You're not just doing one A/B test, you're usually doing multiple ongoing A/B testing. It becomes part of your routine and regular M&E practice. So what does this look like kind of practically? How do you run an A/B test? In education, kind of we generally take individual students or groups of students who are generally clustered in schools or classrooms or villages, and randomly allocate them to two different versions of the program. So for those of you kind of familiar with RCTs, you're used to an intervention group, and then you have a business as usual control. We don't have the business as usual control in A/B testing. These are two similar but not identical versions of a particular program. So in this case, our units, let's say classrooms, are allocated to versions A and versions B of the program. We wait collect our baseline and our endline data over the course of, let's say, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, and we compare the impact and cost of the two versions. That's this yellow box right here. So it's not only important to think about what's the impact gain, but also cost, right? Versions A and B might have different costs, and it's important to consider not only just the impact, but also impact at what cost. And once we've determined kind of which is the more cost-effective version of the program, then we go back and do it again. So then, let's say B became the most B was the most cost-efficient version of the program in our first A/B test. Well, and then we determined, okay, this was the winner. This is where we saw the greatest impact per dollar, let's say. Then that becomes version A of the program, right? So we're doing this in a secular and repeated way. One thing that we find very helpful, or one way that we categorize tests, is to think about two different types of tests. So the first one here is effectiveness. The first one here is cost reducing. So the image that you see here is a Jenga tower. So those of you who play Jenga, you know that the whole goal of the game is to take pieces out of the tower without the tower falling. And the idea in a cost reducing test is to be able to take something away from the program. Think of something as making the program lower cost, but achieving a similar impact. The version of our building not falling here is actually achieving the same impact, but at lower cost. Examples of those types of tests are, for one example, would be thinking about a training module. We know that across kind of education programs, training can be really expensive. We might think of a virtual version of the training to see if we can lower costs. Or we could think about, this is for our phone tutoring program, different ways of scheduling that would reduce friction in the program. Now, on the effectiveness enhancing, the image here is a building block. So think of your Legos, your Duplos. We're trying to think about how to build on and enhance impact. In this case, you might have different costs in terms of the versions, and the costs might go up, but we would also expect to see a big impact boost and an improvement in cost effectiveness. So again, you're still looking at the cost effectiveness piece, but for these, we're really thinking about program enhancement. So for example, if we're trying out a new curriculum, if we're trying out more small group work, we might try out a caregiver and engagement component to see if these things can enhance impact. All right. Then, now I'm going to move on to talking a little bit about youth impacts experience with A/B testing. So this is kind of our journey, and then finally I'll talk about some of the tools and templates in the toolkit. So this figure here basically shows the cumulative number of combined RCTs and A/B tests youth impact has done to date. So you can see here, Youth Impact was founded in about 2014. Nome and Moitepi launched an RCT in Botswana in 2014, and you can see in the green, it took several years. After they had evidence of impact from that RCT, they started doing A/B tests, and that practice really grew over time. The green here in 2020 to 2023 was when Youth Impact carried out a few more RCTs of the ConnectEd program that I'll talk to you about in a minute. And right now, because we've really built up this practice, we're doing at least one A/B test per program per school term in Botswana, and we're building up kind of that similar cadence in other contexts where they're implementing our programs. So just a little bit about ConnectEd, the program I teased in the previous slide. This is a project where we've done quite a lot of A/B testing. It is a one-on-one phone-based tutoring program for foundational literacy and numeracy. A tutor and a child talk for about 20 minutes a week. You can see they're not co-located, and that's complemented by practice problems shared with a caregiver, a kind of form of homework. This map basically shows the locations where we've done RCTs on ConnectEd and A/B tests. We started out with RCTs, as I mentioned earlier. That was our efficacy trial, our program evaluation, and then moved on to basically doing A/B testing. So we had the RCT in about 7 countries, and now we have ongoing testing in about 5 countries where the program is implemented. So it's just a case of moving from an efficacy trial now to really focusing on program improvement. And so, like I said, we've done a lot of A/B tests on this program. Claire, Noam, and our colleague Janica have a great paper out that's through What Works Hub, looking at the results of 12 of these particular tests. Now, remember, you know, A/B tests are lower stakes than RCTs. The interventions or variations to the program are sometimes a little more experimental than what you might do in an RCT, so you wouldn't expect every one of them necessarily to have an impact. So they were looking at kind of what type of variation do we see across the various A/B tests. They use this effectiveness enhancing and cost reducing classification that I talked about earlier, and each bubble here in the figure is a test. And I would say the takeaway here is they found a lot of value in trying both types of tests. For the effectiveness enhancing tests, I would say the results are mixed. You can see there are about 3 or 4 of those out of 7 generated gains. For the cost reducing, what is really interesting about that, and maybe unexpected, was that the results are much more consistent. So remember that with cost reducing, we're trying to generate similar impacts by taking away something out of the program, by reducing costs. And so what they found was basically all of the cost reducing tests actually generated similar impact at lower cost. So that's an important thing to consider when designing A/B tests. You might want to try a variety of the effectiveness enhancing and cost reducing, because at least from our experience, we really saw a lot of benefit from the cost reducing tests. All right, now moving on to how do you do A/B testing for organizations that say, okay, how do I get started? I mentioned also that Youth Impact works with partners to help them do A/B testing. That was really the genesis of this toolkit. Like, how can we help others to carry out this M&E practice? And we basically have, this is a process that we found works really well to help organizations build up to having a successful A/B testing practice, not rushing into it, but just building the tools and infrastructure to be able to carry this out on an ongoing basis. The first step is so this is the 4-step process. The first step is just trying out implementing 2 versions of the program. This is small scale. It's not randomized. It's just to get your program team saying, like, okay, I'm going to do this version of the program in this place and this version of the program in this other place. Step 2 is really about ensuring that your A/B testing, that your M&E system is A/B test ready. So strengthening your data collection system. We call this data flow because the data collection should be that you're using for your standard M&E practice should also be using for your A/B testing. You're not thinking about a separate data collection exercise. This is ongoing routine monitoring data that you're using for A/B testing. And then step 3, you want to carry out a simple test to start, so not super ambitious. And then by step 4, you're doing this ongoing testing where you're asking kind of more ambitious, more important, more program relevant questions. So a few features to highlight a few features of this process. There's obviously a lot more detail in the toolkit, but one is that in step 2, during the data flow process, it's super important to select this golden indicator. Jonathan actually, introed this a little bit, trying to pick one indicator to start where you're tracking progress over time. And we call this a golden indicator because it's this sweet spot in the theory of change. So here's a really simple theory of change for teaching at the right level.
Just a
You'd
quick
want,
1 minute
you don't,
warning, Amanda.
okay, great. Thanks so much. You don't want the indicator to be too far left in your theory of change that it's not useful for decision making, but it also shouldn't be too far right that it takes too long to materialize, right? So golden indicators are basically in this sweet spot to be helpful for decision making, and they can change quickly. We have a tool or template that helps you narrow down your golden indicator. You can list all of the indicators that you collect data on and figure out which might be the best fit for a golden indicator. And then when doing your first test, we have a couple of tools or templates to help you think about your first test. Here, you're really focusing on feasibility. So this is, you write down all your questions, you think about the most feasible. And then other factors, obviously, for every test are here thinking about, so as you do ongoing testing, basically, you're thinking about things other than just feasibility, right? You're also thinking about the type of test, effectiveness enhancing or cost reducing, right? That's a very important consideration. How priority or low priority it is to your team. Also, how ambitious is it? Jonathan mentioned that, but do you already know the answer to the question or not? So these are also really important considerations when you're thinking about the ongoing testing piece. So yeah, just to build on kind of thinking about what makes for a good A/B testing question, and building on the characteristics that I talked about before, which were feasibility, the type of test, how high priority it is to your team, the ambition. Also, one thing that we find really important to highlight is that the questions come from your implementation team, right? So as a researcher or as your role as the M&E lead, you might be thinking about the design, the research design, but a lot of the design of questions, the better questions really come from your implementation team because they're supposed to be, programmatic and program relevant questions. And then also lastly, again, this last point, Jonathan made this, which was think about a question where you don't know the answer yet. Don't test something that might already be quite obvious. Yeah, that's it. I think with that, I'm going to hand it over to Andres.
Amazing. Thanks, Amanda. Just really quickly while Andres is pulling up his presentation, something I should have noted at the start for panelists, please feel free if you have questions to enter them into the Q&A function. So it's either going to be at the bottom of your screen or under the More function. We have a few people who've already figured it out, so gold star to them without needing prompting. But for others, that's how we'll make sure that panelists get the questions. And so, Andres, over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Jonathan and Amanda. That was a great presentation to see. While the slides are being pulled up, let me just say from the outset that a lot of the things that I'm going to mention really echo what Amanda has said. And in some sense, the work that we've been doing at the Right-Fit Evidence Unit at IPA is a subset of the types of organizations that might want to use A/B testing. We've been really focusing on working with what we call digital first organizations, and I'm going to present one example from our organization in Colombia. But you can think of the work as like, how do things change when we're dealing with organizations that are delivering digitally, where the frequency of data might be higher, where some of the metrics are produced automatically, and where you have to really think about the interaction between the data systems, the user experience, and ultimately the learning outcomes that you care about. We also today managed to finalize a tool that we're going to be sharing also on the chat. with great guidance from and feedback from the team here, including Amanda, Noam, and it was written in with some co-authors who are also looking at this presentation, Eduardo Vargas and Mariana Rodriguez. Um, so let me go ahead and start with the slides. Okay, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time here because Amanda, I think, made the point greatly. But once you have a program that you want to scale, usually they suffers from a voltage drop. So maybe at scale, you're not implementing it in the same quality with the same fidelity. Um, and so the question becomes, sorry, let me go back here. The question becomes is like, how do you ensure that you have the program that you want and that you improve on um, on the cost effectiveness of the program? And here is an iterative example. These examples are taken from the paper that Amanda mentioned, where you want to do a sequence of steps in order to find the best version of your program. So you start with the status quo, and then potentially you think of a modification based on field feedback on, sending an SMS weekly with math problems. You see how that impacts either the effectiveness or whether that reduces the cost of implementing something that you were doing. And then you follow that sequence of steps to, figure out what is the best version of what you might want to do at the end. And this is something that Amanda alluded to, but not everything is going to be a hit, right? The core idea is that you establish a system so that you can do a lot of this rapid experimentation, knowing that some of the times you're going to really find one of the best songs, and some of the times the things are not going to quite work out the way that you want, but that's part of the learning process. Either way, you're going to be learning something about your program and about your implementation. And so when we zoom in into how do you actually do this with digital first organizations, we're going to see a lot of the themes that Amanda already brought up. So first, we have to think about what is the high potential return in terms of cost effectiveness. And then second, the capabilities of an organization are going to be very important because here we have an interaction of various data systems. Some of them will be to deliver the actual program, and some of the data systems will be in the back end that is data that is generated automatically, but that you can also leverage with other external resources like Evidential, which I'm sure Tamina will talk about, to actually analyze data. The prioritization that we envision is very similar. It's around cost effectiveness, then figuring out what is that golden indicator in this case, or what we usually call early outcomes, um, and then making sure that we're prioritizing the right intervention. And so the only addition, I think, to the framing around cost effectiveness that we wanna mention here is around this impact piece. We see cost effectiveness as the product of the program reach and the program impact. In digital first programming, it's a lot easier to reach more users with fairly limited marginal cost. And that means that there might be some tweaks that you want to do to your program at the very beginning that might make it easier to reach new populations, that might make it easier to reach new teachers or students that were not prior in your program, in addition to what you want the program's impact to be. So there's some variations and A/B testing that you might want to test just for the impact reach piece of the equation. And then the metrics are also worth mentioning specifically for digital first programming. While we think, it's true that the right metric is often that sweet spot in the theory of change, depending on what you're really aiming to do with your program and how far advanced the program is in its development, you might want to focus on different metrics. So for reach, you might want to look at number of active users or number of onboarded users. You might want to see what is the user engagement and whether that's actually in the end kind of leading to people using the program more and then eventually learning more. I think the bigger point to make here is A, some of these metrics are automatically produced by digital first kind of implementations of program. And then B, if you're establishing an A/B testing system, you can do the A/B test earlier in the theory of change, knowing that that's only a step and that later on you might want to find the indicators that are closer to the final outcome that you care about. And on identifying and prioritizing, sorry about this. On identifying and prioritizing, we very much echo what Amanda said about kind of generating ideas from implementation. Other ways to kind of complement that is through literature reviews and user research. I think the user research methodologies for digital organizations can be also implemented in the settings where we actually want to implement this for primarily students, teachers, and parents who are all involved in the learning. And we also want to make sure that kind of the variations are relevant, right? It's a question that we don't know the answer to, but is the variation really likely to improve something? And it's not just kind of like a change in color, for example. It's actually a meaningful variation. Um, and I'm gonna say something quickly here. The example of Shaya, which is a teacher support chatbot, was essentially trying to figure out how to better incentivize teachers to use a feature of this chatbot. And the feature was creating a profile of student learning in a specific class. So for teachers to know on this class, I think the composition of student is X, on this other class is Y. Learning levels vary across these dimensions on each of the classes. Teachers were not kind of using this feature of the program as much as they could. And the hypothesis that Menti had about this particular feature was that it was going to be more helpful for teachers to create lesson plans. So very quickly, I'm going to talk about capabilities because I'm running out of time. So these are the core 3 steps that we see in developing capabilities to run an A/B test. In terms of sample size, is going to be very important to figure out if in the specific modification that you want to do is likely to lead to impact in a way that the sample size is going to be able to detect it. And the more students that you have or the more teachers that you have, obviously this is also true for things that are not digital, but the core difference is like with digital, you might get higher sample sizes a lot quicker. The key piece is also the systems and tools. So you have to track, kind of ensure that your systems are reliable, that you know what are the metric definitions for different things that you want to measure, and that you have the right experimentations tools. Some of them could be external, like evidential or other open source alternatives. Some of them could be proprietary, but that has to make sense within your specific context. And also ensuring that you have the analytical capacity, so the data management and the statistical ability. Let me just quickly kind of make this point about the data systems and tools. It really depends on what you wanna oh, when you wanna measure. Some of the metadata will be produced automatically, and you might want to kind of have a way to connect that to other external systems that allow for sample size calculations and statistical analysis. But the point being is like you have to be very clear about the metrics, the use case, the modifications in your program, and then decide the right data system for that. So let me stop here. Happy to get in touch with anybody who's interested in our tool or talking more about digital first organizations. Thank you.
Amazing. Thanks, Andres. Thanks, both Amanda and Andres for doing a great job staying on time. Much appreciated to both of you, and a lot of information to pack in a short amount of time. So not an easy task at all. Excited to hand over to our 2 discussants now to give us some reflections. And so we'll start with Tamina.
Great, thanks, Jonathan. I'm Tamina, a co-founder of the Agency Fund. We have had the pleasure of working with the Youth Impact team since around 2020. And and have really seen the growth of A/B testing. I think really with a lot of their input and innovation, and so excited to see this toolkit coming together. I wanted to just touch on a couple of reflections. The first is I noted the word culture is in the toolkit for A/B testing, and I think that's really important to highlight. That running A/B tests becomes part of an organization's culture, and it needs to for the practice of A/B testing to succeed. And so I wanted to talk a couple of examples that we've seen that have helped companies form this culture when maybe you didn't start with A/B testing. One of those is to make sure that when you onboard new staff, everybody learns about A/B testing. We work with a nonprofit called Kabako in West Africa. It focuses on livelihoods. And when they onboard people, even the people who manage access to the building are brought on with an understanding of A/B testing. So everyone in the company is thinking about how we compare different variants of a program and figure out which is better. And I loved that. Another example they have is they have a Slack channel. They use Slack to communicate with each other. They have one that you can join to give input into experiments or learn the latest results. But I think all of this is critical, that part of the groundwork of doing experiments of these A/B tests is to bring everybody together in on it. And I think the youth impact team, you guys call it a learning culture, but you want to find rituals and ways to bring A/B testing into the culture of the organization. I think that's critical. And so, if you are testing out A/B testing for the first time, I would encourage you to bring lots of people into it. It doesn't need to be a secret thing. And if it doesn't work, which it often doesn't the first time, it's okay to celebrate the failure. And so that's one thing I wanted to pull out of this discussion. A second thing that I've seen from the private sector that I wanted to mention, a couple of tools and tips. Youth Impact is open to coaching organizations on starting A/B testing. When Google started its early days of A/B testing, they actually built an experiments council. And this was a small group of advisors who would meet with them at intervals to discuss the experiments that were being planned and sort of de-risk them, give feedback, and kind of beat them up a bit to figure out what might have been missed by the researchers. And then to interpret the results of the last experiment and figure out what worked, what didn't, and what we want to change for next time. And I mention this because Saja, an Indian NGO that Noam has worked with, and I know others may have as well, this is something they do. They got an academic researcher, they got a tech advisor, and I believe one education expert, like domain expert, and met monthly with this group for just an hour to review the experiments they had designed and interpret the results. And partly this gave them access to expertise in a light touch way to guide their work over time. It also gave them some regularity, again, building culture. They were meeting every month with this experiments council. They wanted to come with something interesting to say. So it kept the momentum of testing. And so using that idea from Google in its early days, you might want to consider setting up an experiments council, especially early on while you're still treading the new ground and figuring out your way. And I learned from the chief data officer at Spotify in their early days, they would have vast numbers of experiments they wanted to run on the Spotify platform and its user base. And they didn't know which ones to test first, which experiments, which ideas. They actually started having people bet in the data science team. You can place a bet. I think that this experiment is going to drive up user engagement. I think this is going to get our subscriptions amped up. So I just offer this as an idea. What if you invite team members to a poll to try to predict what the outcomes of your experiment might be, or to help you prioritize which experiments you want to do first? I loved that idea from Spotify, the idea of getting kind of forecasts or crowding in ideas from the team. Again, this is something Youth Impact in the toolkit really emphasizes. This is a whole of team exercise. Your implementers at the front lines are most likely to have the insights that can drive the kind of back end work done by M&E. But getting kind of sourcing those insights from team members, I think, is a really promising approach. The last thing I wanted to mention is the theory of change is really a valuable tool in grounding all of this work. You might ask how to find ideas, how to diagnose the weakest links in your program. Often your theory of change can be a guide to tracking what most needs attention for A/B testing, and sort of targeting where your costs are most dominant. So if you can find a way to construct a theory of change that sort of not construct the theory of change necessarily, but use the theory of change as your guidebook for A/B testing. Think about where your assumptions are strongest and have the weakest support. So it's a very strong assumption you're making. You probably want to test tweaks around that space, or you may want to test tweaks where you think your program is weakest. The way we think about it at the agency fund is through user funnels. It's a way that we've adapted from the tech sector to describe your user journey. You have a large number of users at the beginning of your program, but over time, often users drop out and you're left with a smaller set of people who actually generate impact for you. This is another way to kind of, it's a different framing of a theory of change, a different way of looking at the user experience, but you can use the user funnel as a way to diagnose where the weakest links in the program are, the most people dropping out, and target those for A/B testing, making tweaks, making improvements. We've put out a playbook on user funnels. We think they're a nice complement to the youth impact A/B testing toolkit. And really, again, excited to see this practice expand over time. And I will pause it there.
Amazing. Thank you. I love thinking of, agency fund often thinking outside the box, and in this case, trying to incentivize betting across the sector. So it's a great way to think about it. Thanks, Timina. Over to you, Mpumi.
Hi, everyone. First of all, well done to the team at Youth Impact, and well done to WhatWorks Hub for hosting this. I think it's part of the purpose of having the hub, the idea that there's implementation science that exists out there. How do we codify it? How do we then share it in a way that's accessible and usable by different audiences? And so with that, the toolkit stood out to me because of the range of audiences it's targeted at. So not just the technical people, but NGOs and funders, all being different stakeholders that are necessary if we're going to have successful programs that we are implementing. I also loved how it was staggered and phased. So things that I'm sure as the Youth Impact team are obvious to you are not so obvious if you're not in a culture or practice of doing M&E well. And so capturing those stages has made it accessible and implementable. Then thinking about, in particular, the audience of implementers, what we found in South Africa is often that implementers are really good at implementing their program, not so good at articulating.
Thanks, Mpumi. And now over to Noam for some remarks.
Great. Yes. No. Thank you so much, everyone, and it's great to also see all the questions flowing in the chat. So spot on, and really kind of the next leap of I see stuff on statistical significance, scale questions. So great. Thank you for the wonderful questions. Yes, I would say thank you, everyone, for coming. The demand is clearly very high. It's clear A/B testing is really building as a movement, which is really thrilling to see, because that has not always been the case in the social sector. It has been the case in the tech sector and in industry, but it's really now, it feels like arrived in the social sector and is really expanding. So it's so wonderful to see this interest. I'll share maybe just kind of an origin story and a couple quick some of my favorite A/B tests, but as I kind of wrap up. So I remember when we first came to A/B testing, one of the reasons was we had just run an RCT. Amanda alluded to this in some of her slides. And we got results and they were mixed, as often happens. Often the results are not clear cut. So we saw, okay, the program worked on the one hand, on the other hand, it didn't work so well. So we were left kind of, okay, well, what do we do now? Right? What is the next step? Do we scale? Do we not scale? What do we do? And we felt instinctively what we should do is do less of what didn't work and more of what did, and keep learning. That was sort of what we felt was right. But we felt we didn't have the tools to do that. There was sort of the sense, I think at the time, it felt like RCTs were sort of a stamp, like it works or it doesn't work, right? And so it didn't necessarily feel like we had the tool to iterate and tweak. But what we realized was RCTs have this very powerful tool of, you know that you caused a difference, right? Because it's randomized, you know that what someone got really caused a difference. That's so powerful as a technique for understanding what works. And then we started to look at what were other people doing to learn and improve and iterate. And we saw that in tech, there was this culture of randomization. It was just being called A/B testing. So we said, what's so different about that than what RCTs have been doing? And we started to notice that, okay, they were doing it faster. We said, can we do that? They were doing it at larger scale. We said, okay, can we do that? So we kind of said, oh, there's a lot here actually, and we're already doing a lot of this. Can we do more of those other things? Now you see we've codified it into a nice 3 Rs, right? Rigorous, rapid, regular. There's a series of other things Tamina referenced. The culture, that's very important. The in-house teams that tech has, they're very strong in-house M&E teams. That's something that, there's a lot that needs to be brought into the social sector to make this work. But we started to really realize, oh, this was tractable. And these were some of the things that we had to do. We had to speed it up. We had to get the golden indicators that were happening quicker. We had to do it regularly, not just once. And I remember when we started, some folks said, oh, this isn't going to be possible, actually. It's just not feasible in the social sector. And so there was a little bit of, is this going to be feasible? And then there were some organizations, funders who said, no, we're super excited about this. This is the way of the future. And I remember after we ran our first 10 tests, we said, oh, wow, this is really, this can work. This can really, really work. And so we started to get really into it. And then, multiple organizations were getting into this at the same time. And I think what we see now is it's really taken off. It's happening in multiple organizations, multiple sectors around the world, research organizations, implementing organizations, governments increasingly, funders, and really it's building. And so on the one hand, it feels like it's really taking off. Still, there's so much to learn, though. We're really just scratching the surface. There's some questions in the chat where we have answers to, and some that we don't. And that's what's exciting, actually. We're really kind of getting into this. What's the right level of statistical significance to guide decision making? That's actually kind of an open question. There's not great answers to that. But as a community, I think we can start to put some heuristics around those kind of questions, and already they're forming. So just wanted to say it's been so exciting to see this movement build, and really it feels like there's so much more to learn. Someone once asked me, when have you learned enough? When have you run enough A/B tests? And I said, never. You've never learned enough. There's always more to learn. You can always improve. And so that's part of the promise and the opportunity, I think, of these iterative learning approaches. Interestingly, I went back to Google. Actually, I was trading notes with them about how they were doing A/B testing, how we're doing A/B testing. And, I actually was thought of Google as, okay, they have the ultimate sample size, right? The massive, millions, maybe billions of sample size. So I'm thinking, okay, we have the issue of sample size. Google's going to maybe solve that for us. So I'm chatting to the team at Google, the chief economists team, and they say, so I said, what are some of the questions that keep you up at night? They say sample size. And I was thinking, how can that be? It's Google. So we get into this conversation and they say, oh, well, our typical unit is not the customer. It's actually firms. That's where we do advertising. That's where we make most of our money. So we actually only have a few hundred firms that we're often doing some testing with. Now, they also run A/B tests with customers, but the firms is where most of the money is. And so they said, how do you deal with sample size? And we actually had some heuristics for them. We said, oh, well, you do one test. Then if it's underpowered, you can repeat the test. You can pool the tests. Then initially you see where the winds are blowing. You keep doing it. Then you combine. Then you get something powered. They said, oh, that's very useful. So it's actually been interesting to see the inspiration come from tech. And now actually, as there's more and more innovation in the social sector, some lessons being traded back. So yeah, just to say, very exciting, great to hear from everyone today, and really looking forward to keep learning. The learning never stops as a community, and great to see so much interest here.
Amazing. Thanks, Noam. So it seems that even though normally it would make sense to have Noam close out a session, we have 5 minutes left here to ask some additional questions. I think a lot of them have been answered in the chat so far. I've been trying to keep up to date on what has and hasn't been answered, so that I can pose a few back to the panelists. I think that there was a really interesting question that came up about how do you work with governments or partners that are maybe slower to in some ways or less inclined to experimentation, and so it's sometimes easier within a closed structure. And so maybe that I'll pose as the first question. I don't know, Amanda, if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, sure. A great question. I saw that come up a few times. And I had a slide on that. I just didn't get to it. And we have a section in the toolkit about that. So I would say that youth impact does it both ways. There is basically, if you are able to have a direct implementation arm, so in the youth impact case, we might have youth impact staff who are trained and supervised by youth impact who work in government schools. And that's what I think we call our sandbox. And that allows for much more experimentation. So many organizations have this. They might not be doing A/B testing, but they might just be testing out kind of different things. And with an option of having a sandbox, and if you have enough kind of sandbox units so that you can do A/B testing, then you can try out things that are maybe a little more risky, because say if your regular program implementation is with government teachers and you're trying out tweaks to the curriculum, you might not want to test that out with government teachers first, right? So the idea is like, okay, we have a sandbox, we're going to test that out with our direct delivery arm. And then if that looks effective, then we would try it on the government implementation side. We might pilot it with government and then do an A/B test. So it could be a gradual process. We've also done A/B tests kind of straight away with government, depending on the type of thing that you're changing, right? If it's something that is not a big deal for teachers. So for example, like if you're giving extra homework problems for students, you might think that's not a big change. Teachers can accommodate that change. It might not make sense to do that with your direct delivery arm. So I think it's important to think about kind of like what is the intervention that you're testing, and would it work with government? If you're not sure about government yet, you want to test it out with your own staff, I would try direct delivery first. I think that's probably the best strategy, but we've seen it work with both. And we also work with partners who don't have a direct delivery arm and just do A/B testing with the government implementation. Yeah, let me just see if anyone else on the panel has more to add to that.
I would just say that we've seen a lot of struggle with organizations trying to engage governments in A/B testing. And I think there's a need for the movement to come into the public sector as well. I know it's hard because governments are expected to be reliable. They're expected to produce kind of an output that is consistent. But we know that localization and customization is really important for users. So hopefully there'll be a movement to allow for more A/B testing and even personalization by government. And I think it's on us to bring our government partners along.
That's great. I mean, Mpumi, as a government partner, although albeit one who has experimentation in your mind more than most.
Yeah, I guess it's saying that there are research sections in some governments, and tapping into those people like me who are in research and government is one way of speaking to the right people who would value experimentation. And then also to think about government officials or teachers as other people in the sector who also have ideas and are interested in finding what works. So I found that it depends on how you're framing what you're doing, getting their buy-in on why you're doing it and how they can contribute to knowledge is actually exciting. And so there is space for that, even in the midst of government being regulated, etc. We're all trying to just make things work better. And so let's think about creative ways of getting the buy-in.
Thanks, Mpumi. So we are officially at time. I know it goes very quickly and it's hard to cut things off. There are a lot of unanswered questions still in the chat. I'll take the chair prerogative, even though I have nothing to do with the hub, and say, don't worry, they'll answer all the questions and get back to you after this. And I'm sure there will be some documentation links that sent out as well if people are still interested in that. But from my side, I mean, huge thank you to Amanda and Andres for great presentations. Mpumi and Temina, lovely comments and really valuable insights to think about this. Noam, the closing remarks, especially the answer to the question of when are we done, and the answer is never. I think is definitely something that resonates with many of us, and so yeah, I'm really excited that this is now out there. I hope that we see a lot more A/B testing coming out from a lot more organizations. I think it's a great way for the sector to be moving, and this evidence generation is something we're all excited about. So thanks to everyone. Thanks everyone for joining, and looking forward to seeing what comes next.